Hey, before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all gathering and occupying stolen Gadigal land. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and big respect to all mob in the room. Yeah, I think as peer workers we understand solidarity and understand those living experiences and want to work towards proper reconciliation and land back. Oh yeah, and I'd also like to acknowledge that, yeah, trans people have always existed in all cultures, but especially Indigenous cultures. And the trans being a talking point or a new topic is not actually a thing. It's, trans people have thrived throughout time, and things like the gender binary and those things have been, you know, overimposed with our Western civilization. And also, before we start, we'd like to acknowledge there's another LGBTQI plus workshop happening next door at the same time, and I was trying to reframe it. I'm like, oh, it's actually good because you can't escape the gay agenda. So that's my peer work reframe of it. But also, I also felt a little bit sad that like we're all pitting the queers against each other. So I'm holding the dialectic of that. You know, dialectics. And yes, we're going to have a queer hangout on the back veranda. So if
yeah, during afternoon tea.
Do afternoon tea if you want to come hang out or be with people. This is me. Oh, what an ugly photo of me in Lake Como. Oh no. That's my long title. That's where I used to work, and there are some things that I enjoy.
Hi, my name is Melody. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them, and I'm a peer worker in the Western Sydney Local Health District, specifically at Westmead Hospital, working with young people aged 12 to 18 in the inpatient setting. Additionally, I'm on the Community Advisory Council of the New South Wales Mental Health Commission. In my work, I come across a lot of transgender and gender diverse young people. Additionally, I'm a queer identifying young person myself. But, you know, today we'll be covering gender-affirming care applied to consumers of all ages. So firstly, we'll cover the one-on-one of what we're talking about today, and then moving on to discuss the why of gender-affirming care in peer work and how of applying this in our peer work. So yeah, Trans 101. So first of all, when we talk about sex, we mean the visible or invisible sex characteristics of the human body. Visible sex characteristics, big word, means things like genitals. Invisible sex characteristics include things like chromosomes, so XX, XY, XXY, for example, and internal reproductive organs. Yeah, so sexuality, when an individual's sexual and romantic attraction to another person, you know, as we all know, sexualities can be fluid, and you know, it's not for everybody. But yeah, you know, straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, asexual, such. Yeah.
Gender identity. So that's, I guess, how you know yourself to be. This might be what you're assumed at birth. It's your outward appearance, it's clothing, it's hair, it's makeup, it's language, it's expression, it's culture, essentially. It's the things that make sense to you. If you identify with the gender that was presumed at birth for you, you also have a gender identity. You are cisgender. That's good. Being cis is good. It's great. I mean, you got the script and you're like, yes, this fits. Fantastic. But that's not the case for some people, and that is okay. And it's not a negative word, it's just a word.
Yeah. Pronouns?
Pronouns is the words we use to address each other. So I use she or they, depending on my mood. Yeah, and I think...
Yeah, the gender grid?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So this is a fun tool that we use to, I guess, everyone exists on these spectrums in different parts. As Melody said earlier, It can be fluid, it can move. What do you want to add about it?
No, not much.
Okay, this is, I filled one out. So like, I was sort of like misdiagnosed as a boy at birth. Sometimes I like to be a little bit masculine. Sometimes I like to just wear tracksuits and not exist at all. Who likes to do that? Yeah. Sometimes you don't want to express any gender. But mostly I've been, yeah. And same with sexuality, it's a binary. I used to date all sorts of people. At the moment I'm only dating women and non-binary people. It changes over time.
So this is kind of my example. As we can see, I was assigned female at birth. My anatomical sex aligns with being female, and I still identify with being female, which makes me cisgender. So, yeah. Just a bit on affirmation and transition.
So these are the types of affirmation that people do. Medical is stuff like hormones. Possible, you might have surgeries, things to affirm the gender. Legal is when you might want to change your name, you might want to, gender markers, things like that. And social is how you exist in the world. Choosing a new name or communicating that to the people you care about. And they're all valid and they're all important. And some people might do all of these things. Some people might only want to do one, or sometimes it's as peer workers, we all understand the idea of respecting autonomy and understanding that each individual person is the expert on their experience. And that peer framework applies to trans healthcare.
So what is a gender-affirming care? I guess that's kind of important since that's what we're here for. As we can see, gender-affirming care applied to everybody. Is things that we all do to affirm our gender or identity, practices or behaviors we might do. Applied to healthcare, gender-affirming care is an evidence-based, trauma-informed approach to social services in healthcare that is backed by numerous government guidelines, including the New South Wales Health LGBTI strategy and the ACT guidelines for gender-affirming care in mental health care. We're going to go into, why gender-affirming care is a peer work priority.
Oh, you missed a good bit. Everyone affirms their gender. Cis people affirm their gender. If you are a woman and you like removing body hair, that's a gender affirmation. That's something that you find helps you feel more you. Maybe you might be a cisgender man and you might lift weights because it makes you feel like, that you physically can appear more in the way that you see yourself, your sense of self. It's about aligning sense of self. And it's important to understand that we all do things like that because it makes us feel whole. And that's what this is about. This is a really kind of harrowing statistic about the overlap between suicidality and gender diversity. I want to touch on the fact that you can read the stats, they're pretty grim. Trans people present because they're experiencing discrimination, not because they're not suicidal because they're trans. They're probably suicidal because they've been excluded from a space because of existing authentically. So I think keeping that framework of understanding that why they're presenting.
Another kind of point for why we consider gender-affirming care to be a peer priority is, looking at the history of peer work emerging out of the consumer ex-patient psychiatric survivor movement of the 70s and 80s and 90s as well. An activist movement that fought for mental health consumers' rights on the basis of consumers as an oppressed class, more marginalized by the medical model and mainstream mental health services. In the same vein, the consumer ex-patient psychiatric survivor movement weaves in and out of and is part of disability rights movements. But yeah, so on this basis, peer workers can look to mental health consumers and psychosocial disability as a social marginalization and othering that transgender people also experience from the same or similar forces. Both of our groups know the experience of existing in systems that, don't respect or understand you, whether that's the medical model and the mental health care system or a society that's continually rejecting of trans people. But yeah, additionally, at the end of the day, the experience of both mental health consumers and trans people can be considered the advocacy of human rights. And yeah, so for this reason, we consider peer workers to be natural advocates in the humanistic care of trans and gender diverse consumers, given our shared histories of oppression and the ongoing movements that have and will continue to fight for human rights.
Yeah, I think it aligns with the peer work values because it's about believing people, right? You don't have to have the same living experience of something to understand or believe someone or support them to access care. In the same way that someone was maybe fleeing domestic violence, like you believe them, right? When they tell you who they are, what they're going through. That's the same thing. Believe people when they tell you, trust them, give them the tools to advocate for themselves. You don't have to have a deep understanding of it. You just have to understand that the person that you're working with is accessing care. And you as a peer worker understand that solidarity better than anyone.
So, how peer workers can deliver gender-affirming care?
Self-education is a great one. It's if you're a bit like, I'm not sure, I feel a bit like do a little bit of research. Like there's heaps of stuff out there. Trans Hub is like the go-to. It has it's updated constantly with all these resources, all the language, everything. If you want to link in with someone, a doctor, please just go to that website if you're working with a gender diverse person, please. Allyship signals. So yeah, this stuff like pronouns badges, emails. Some people are like, oh, why do I need to put that in my email? I'm cis. Well, it's really helpful actually, because if you're a trans person and you're accessing care and you see that in someone's email, you know straight away that this person is an ally. You know straight away this person isn't going to invalidate me bringing this up. So in that moment, who is it about? The person accessing care, not you. We signal these things to help other people. I always joke and say, oh, my little badges like do all the heavy lifting. I wear like a rainbow lanyard and, quite visibly queer. And it does go a long way because that person in ED or wherever comes up and is like, oh, I'll tell you what's going on because I trust you. Do you know what I mean? Like kind of just exist and show people in these ways that they can come to you.
But yeah, I guess another, way of delivering gender-affirming care is actually, reminding colleagues of consumers' name and pronouns. So as peer workers, we are no strangers to the concept of calling out our colleagues for misguided statements or care about our consumers, a sentiment that does not reflect the trauma-informed approach that we know. So our advocacy can also include the gentle reminders we make on the team and to clinicians of the humanity and of the consumers we care for. The same can be applied to advocacy for trans consumers. So small acts of advocacy, such as the gentle reminder of a trans consumer's preferred name and pronouns or the role modeling of how to refer to a consumer with their preferred name and pronouns, are ways that we as peers in our role can ally ourselves with trans consumers. This kind of flows on to, an open workplace culture, basically how you talk about and regard trans consumers. Whether that's the formal documentation, just like I said, role modeling how you and your colleagues can do that. For example, in my EMR notes, because I do EMR documentation at the start, because the name doesn't align with what the legal name is. I'll say like in big red bold letters so nobody misses it. This consumer goes by this name and these pronouns, and I'm going to refer to this consumer as that. But yeah, no, I think like, what else?
I think it's important to be consistent when you're talking about gender diverse people. If you're just doing it when you're doing a face-to-face and not in the handover, that's that's what affects the culture of a workplace, right? Like if it's happening bedside and it's not happening in the nurse's station, sometimes there's that disconnect, right? You have to be practicing it 100% of the time, because that's what affects the culture of a workplace.
Jesus.
All
right.
Played off.
Well, we got like 3 minutes left, so we're gonna keep on going.
I'm gonna crash course it. Maybe best practices don't say identifies, just say they are. That's not helpful. It's kind of reductive. So, if you're not sure, just ask. We all work with people from different backgrounds. The example I like to give is someone like a mixed race background. I can't pronounce their last name. I will just ask them, how do you pronounce your name? Or maybe someone has like a Western name and it's not written on their form, right? But you call them that because you know that's what they like to be called. We do that all the time. You already have these skills. You use them every day in your practice. It's about applying them to a vulnerable group of people. That's the big takeaway. You already know how to do this.
Yeah, great. But yeah, so like Naif-Jamie said in the beginning, there's also self-education, but there's also some further training and further reading that you can do. I've actually got a handout. I only printed 50, so I hope that's everybody, of Trans Hub for allies, clinicians, and healthcare workers, as well as some academia and some research that you can read. We just want to do a little acknowledgement as well of the intersections between cultural diversity and queer and trans identities. So I don't know if you guys know, but I'm Filipino. But yeah, one of the barriers also in gender-affirming care. We'll get to the Filipino bit in a minute. But one of the barriers in applying gender-affirming care is is that a lot of this stuff doesn't come naturally. And that's natural. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of people haven't grown up with. Even though trans identities aren't new, surely the awareness and the mainstream kind of adoption of gender-affirming care is new. So we kind of certainly acknowledge that. But yeah, with the whole Filipino bit, I guess one thing is geez, I can't read my little script. But yeah, so another barrier is a possible clash between, cultural diversity and understanding of trans identities and the adoption of gender-affirming care. So yeah, I'm Filipino. My mom is Filipino. When I began socializing within the queer community and naturally became friends with trans and gender diverse people, I know it was difficult for my mom to adapt these changes in language. So yeah, in Tagalog, pronouns are gender neutral. So with my mom, she always kind of struggled with gendered pronouns anyways. But yeah, when it came to, my trans friends coming around and hanging out, I know that it was difficult for her to adopt that new language because it was certainly new to her. But eventually, over time, with practice and self-reflection and a bit of self-correction as well, she's become a lot better with it. So yeah, it's kind of something that we wanted to acknowledge. Yeah.
Thanks.